he had an executive order that banned effectively critical race theory trainings in the government, as well as any company that implemented these trainings as well. Well, when Joe Biden got in, he rescinded this executive order, and now there are questions about what's going to be happening at universities. Apparently, there was a rule from the Department of Education that racial affinity groups were discriminatory. These groups are basically when they take a bunch of people of one race and make them segregate. Under Donald Trump, that was against the rules, and now under Joe Biden, it is within the rules and, in my opinion, shockingly discriminatory. Well, we have a very specific story from Smith College, and one of their staff members, who was a white staff member, who is accusing the university of anti-white racism. But instead of me trying to break down the long and arduous journey for you, we actually are joined by Jodi Shaw, who you were the staffer who resigned. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am. Hi, I'm Jodi Shaw, former staffer of Smith College. Should I tell the story?
Just a really quick and simple introduction, like you quit for,
well,
maybe like 30 seconds.
Okay, so there's a lot of context, but essentially Smith's various initiatives and policies aimed at achieving racial justice are grounded in critical race theory. And what we know about critical race theory is it's not that somebody commits an act of racism, it's that somebody is racist simply based on their skin color. And that skin color happens to be white.
Basically, wokeness is taking over these universities, and you had to experience it firsthand, and it essentially forced you out. So we'll talk about your story, and there's a bunch of other stories. Apparently, there's another professor who's come out and called it, what does he call it, like a religion, basically, a non-secular religion.
Secular religion. Yeah.
Secular religion, right? Secular, which is we heard that from Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose as well years ago. So we'll get into this. We're also hanging out with Ian.
Hey everyone, Ian Crossland up in this. How's it going, Jodi? Yeah, up in this house.
There you go. Yes, hello. And also me in the corner pushing buttons. I'm Sarah Patch Lentz.
Before we get started, we have an amazing sponsor today, Virtual Shield, a virtual private network service. Go to surfinginternetsafe.com and you can get a virtual private network service 50% off for life. That's $2.50 per month. You may be asking, Tim, what is a virtual private network service? It is a basic layer of security for you as you browse the internet. There are nefarious actors, there's governments, there's corporations. They want to steal your data. They want to spy on you. They want to collect information about you. They want to know things about you that you yourself probably don't know. They can predict your behavior. It's really, really creepy stuff. If you would like a basic layer of security, make it harder for these nefarious actors to collect your information, go to surfinginternetsafe.com, get Virtual Shield. Again, basic layer of security. Here's the way I describe it. We don't expect people to break into our houses. We still lock our doors and windows because, hey, it might happen. We at least want to make it a little bit harder for those who might do it. And in the event you end up a target of maybe somebody wants to steal your credit card information or intrude on you or spy on your browser history or something like that, you'll probably want a VPN. And it's not that hard to set up. Just go to Surfing Internet Safe and you can get, again, 50% off for life. The link is in the description below. And I just want to shout out Virtual Shield. They're my first sponsor. They've been here for, with me for years, and they really help make all of this possible. So if you want to return the favor, again, surfinginternetsafe.com. Don't forget, go to timcast.com, become a member to get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast. We have a bunch of really fun and silly segments, and I got, guys, for some reason, don't ask me why, all of these segments end up turning into conversations about like DMT and God for some reason. It's like, hey, we're going to talk about aliens. Well, interestingly, DMT and God. And then we have, Kurt Schlichter talking about Dr. Fauci, and then it all just finds its way in there because we just reduce all of these conversations to the bigger questions, I guess. But anyway, if you like the idea of these conversations, go to timcast.com, become a member, click the like button, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Leave us a good review if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, because that really, really does help. 5 stars. And again, share this podcast if you really like it. Today is going to be much more focused on a lot of topical stories, but we're going to jump into the story from Jodi so we can better understand exactly what's going on with your case and what you're experiencing in these universities. So I'll lay it out. I think most people understand wokeness, critical theory, which is not just race theory, it's also critical gender theory. They seem to be formless in a sense, like the rules don't really make sense. They just want you to bend the knee and adhere to their strange subjective reality. It's resulting in overtly bigoted and racist policies, which in my opinion, violate the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So for me personally, one of the reasons I supported Trump in this election cycle, in this past election cycle, was because of his executive order banning critical race theory in the government, as well as contracts with companies that do this. Because I've seen firsthand what happens when you implement these neo-racist, neo-segregationist policies. Universities are creating affinity groups. They're telling all the white people to segregate and all the black people to segregate. And then it creates very strange problems with whether or not Asians are minorities or they're white and privileged. So you've experienced this firsthand. And first, just tell me the story, and whatever detail you want to tell us the story, where you ultimately resigned from your job because I guess they were being racist to you for being white.
Yes, that's accurate.
All right. Thank you for telling your story.
That's
No, I'm
great
kidding.
story.
Come on. So what happened? Where did you work? Smith College. What's going on?
Smith College. So I started off at Smith as a temporary librarian, working in the library as an outreach and engagement librarian. And I was hired to do, kind of out of the box things to engage students who otherwise normally wouldn't engage very deeply with the library. And about, almost a year after I was hired, or 6 months after I was hired, I was tasked with doing a wild and crazy event for 600 first-year students. And I decided, and I was given a big venue, and the people who gave me the venue said, we will give you this venue if you do something wild and crazy, because these kids are going to be exhausted. This is the 6th day of the event. So you got to agree to that. So I did, and I thought, I have a musician background. So I thought, well, what's the best way to transmit a bunch of very boring information to a bunch of 600 first-year students? Obviously a rap. So everyone knew I was going to be doing a rap. I spent months preparing, working with musicians, getting everything set up, the sound and everything. And simultaneously, I was up for a permanent job at Smith College. So I worked all summer on this, and then something happened at Smith. On July 31st, 2018, a black student accused a white custodian of engaging in racially motivated behavior against her. She was in a house that she was not supposed to be in. It was over the summer, and the staff there had allowed her to be in the house, but this custodian didn't know who she was. She was lying down in this living room, couldn't see her very well. And this incident's been documented quite well now in a recent New York Times article. Ever since that incident, the college immediately, so the student...
That was like 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was in 2018, July. She made a Facebook post. So she didn't even file a formal complaint. She simply posted about the experience on Facebook and said that this was just another example of a pattern of systemic racism she had experienced at Smith College. So the college immediately sprung into action, announcing profuse apologies to the student and to the student body, and announced its intention to launch all these initiatives and committees and conversations and dialogues to combat this issue of systemic racism at the college. And this was before they'd even conducted any investigation into what had actually happened that day. So they did conduct an investigation, a very thorough one, and they found that there was absolutely no evidence of racial bias. And anyone who is privy to the facts of what happened that day and has read this investigatory report, it's 35 pages plus 130 pages of exhibits. I mean, it was really thorough. They would be hard pressed to argue that this was an incident of racial bias.
That in and of itself is insane. That a woman was sitting down she was in a closed dorm. A janitor saw her and said, "Who's this?" So instead of confronting the person, which could have been a bad call, he called a cop. The cop was very polite. There's video of it where he's just like, "How's it going? How are things? Sorry for bothering you." And that warranted an independent investigatory body coming in, a 35-page report.
35-page report plus exhibits, floor plans, audio recordings. They investigated phone calls to campus. This was campus police, so unarmed. It wasn't like the town police. This is campus police, a guy who'd been working there for 35 years. His name's Robert Young. Beloved, spotless record. He showed up, and I think he recognized the student. I heard he recognized her, and she was able to stay. So yeah, it was like they were really trying hard to prove that it was, in my opinion, and they weren't able to. The outside investigators said this is not an incident of racial bias, and yet they proceeded with all these initiatives. And
it's almost like it didn't matter what the event was. They wanted the anti-racism, which is just a name, by the way. They wanted the critical race theory policies in the school. And it sounds like they knew it was bunk, but they needed a pretext. And even though it was proven bunk, they moved forward anyway.
I think that's an accurate analysis.
So what ended up happening to you then?
So what happened to me was, meanwhile, I'm in the library working on my rap. And so this happened on July 31st, and the orientation I was doing was happening in very early, like right after Labor Day. And so within a week of me doing this huge thing, organizing an event for 600 people, it's no small undertaking, I was told, my supervisor came in and said, you can't do this. You can't do a rap. And I said, why not? And he said, because you're white, and it would be seen as cultural appropriation. So
did you try identifying as not white?
I did ask. I said,
You really
no,
did? I was kidding.
I didn't. I said, so if I was not white, or I said if I was a person of color, and I didn't indicate what color. I said, if I was a person of color, would I be allowed to do it? And he said yes, without hesitation. So obviously just anybody except for somebody who's white.
What about Eminem?
Ooh.
Did you tell him that?
Yeah.
Well,
One of the
did.
most
Eminem's a white
prolific,
supremacist dude.
prolific
Oh,
actors of our time.
Yeah, seriously.
Or
You mean
rappers of
musicians?
our time, rather.
I'm kidding, by the way.
He's
He's
a
not a
good
white
actor, too.
supremacist.
Well, I mean, yeah, people say that, Macklemore, and I mean, of course, Tom McDonald, but I mean, really, rap is an American. It's an American art. It's culturally American. I think that's my view.
I don't understand
But
why we all can't just, appreciate. You know what I mean? Like,
It's actually like racist of me to try and play that game about what about
Who-
a white guy who did it too.
And
like,
was it-
you're right. It's an American art form.
who invented the
It is.
guitar? Where did the guitar come from? Huh?
Good question.
Who's using that? Or keyboards? Or turntables?
Jeez,
Who invented the
Middle
record
East?
player?
Yeah.
Or the
Miller.
lute? Everybody,
Tesla? I don't
look.
know.
This is why I'm like, this stuff's really scary because it's kind of obvious. Let me ask you: your supervisor who came in and said you can't rap. Is this like a middle-aged white dude?
He's a white dude, but he's not middle-aged. He's younger than me. And he's actually the head of the search committee for the job I was up for. So it was
Wow.
very awkward.
Oh.
And
So- Was he woke?
I think
just a
he's
coward.
towing the line.
So coward? He's
I'm
you should don't answer that. Don't answer that. I personally do not respect individuals who would say something like that because I think what he said to you was extremely racist. Extremely
yes,
racist.
it was so unhesitating. I mean, the manner in which he said it, and then followed up by an email. He memorialized this in an email, in writing. And then I went to the dean of the libraries and I said, what's going on? And she actually said to me something that was a veiled threat. Remember, I was up for a job, and she said, well, how you manage to be resilient in the face of this situation is really going to give us a lot of information in light of your candidacy for this job. It was something like that. I'm paraphrasing.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a veiled threat. And so the fact that they did it so blatantly and explicitly, I was genuinely confused. I was like, because when I heard about the student, all I heard was a black student was just lying on a couch in a house and somebody called the police on her. That's terrible. Like, that was the narrative that I heard. Right. I didn't really go, because there was no investigation. That's what the college told me. I really didn't have reason not to believe them at that point. So I was confused. I was like, well, this really feels like racial discrimination. He literally told me, because you're white, you can't do this job opportunity. And I wrestled with, well, should I file a complaint? I was like, but can white people be discriminated against? Like, is that possible? And I thought, well, gee, if I report it, I'll never get a job here because white people aren't supposed to complain about this stuff. They're not supposed to do that. And so it was a very hard for me emotionally to wrestle with what I was supposed to do with that. And what I ended up doing was I ended up leaving the library and moving to a different department on campus, thinking that I could get away from, because there was also lots of these discussions and dialogues that were happening even before this event had occurred that I just went along with. And again, I had no reason to believe, oh, there's systemic racism. Okay. And I guess, as a white person, you're supposed to talk about your privilege and that's going to help somehow. So I thought, okay. But inside it always felt kind of disingenuous.
So you didn't quit at this point?
No, I
stayed at the
left.
school.
I stayed at the school. Yeah, it's a long story. So I went to a different department, And I didn't know that this department, the Department of Residence Life, is very steeped in the social justice. That's one of its like core values. And again, at the time I thought, oh, social justice. Yeah, I can get with that. I hadn't quite put all the pieces together. And I think this is part of the problem is a lot of people are genuinely confused.
You needed to be watching Timcast IRL,
I
obviously.
need-
Yeah, it's
was
not
not
your
watching-
fault, though. I mean, a lot
Sorry.
of people don't know about how awesome. I'm kidding. Continue.
Yeah, I definitely need to be watching Timcast. So, yeah, I moved into this department and other things started happening on campus. Like the campus police officer who showed up to that incident was terminated a year later. And this is a guy
For racism?
No, it was for undisclosed reasons.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And he was a 35-year veteran, about to retire, spotless police officer. He was beloved. We called him Officer Bob. He was there when I was a student there.
That's a Simpsons joke where they're like, he was 2 days away from retirement. Like they do that all the time. Like the dog gets hit by a car. Like, he was 2 days away from retirement. Here's this cop. I mean, it's
Conversations and dialogues, given a big venue. And the people who gave me the venue said, we will give you this venue if you do something wild and crazy because these kids are going to be exhausted. This is the 6th day of the event. So you got to agree to that. So I did. And I thought, and I have a musician background. So I thought, well, what's the best way to transmit a bunch of very boring information to a bunch of 600 first-year students? Obviously a rap. So everyone knew I was going to be doing a rap. I spent months preparing, working with musicians, getting everything set up, the sound and everything. And simultaneously, I was up for a permanent job at Smith College. So I worked all summer on this. And then something happened at Smith. On July 31st, 2018, a black student accused a white custodian of engaging in racially motivated behavior against her. She was in a house that she was not supposed to be in. It was over the summer, and the staff there had allowed her to be in the house, but this custodian didn't know who she was. She was lying down in this living room, couldn't see her very well. And this incident's been documented quite well now in a recent New York Times article. Ever since that incident, the college immediately, so the student...
That was like 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was in 2018, July. She made a Facebook post. So she didn't even file a formal complaint. She simply posted about the experience on Facebook and said that this was just another example of a pattern of systemic racism she had experienced at Smith College. So the college immediately sprung into action, announcing profuse apologies to the student and to the student body, and announced its intention to launch all these initiatives and committees and conversations and dialogues to combat this issue of systemic racism at the college. And this was before they'd even conducted any investigation into what had actually happened that day. So they did conduct an investigation, a very thorough one, and they found that there was absolutely no evidence of racial bias. And anyone who is privy to the facts of what happened that day and has read this investigatory report, which is it's 35 pages plus 130 pages of exhibits. I mean, it was really thorough. They would be hard pressed to argue that this was an incident of racial bias.
That in and of itself is insane. That a woman was sitting down she was in a closed dorm. A janitor saw her and said, "Who's this?" So instead of confronting the person, which could have been a bad call, he called a cop. The cop was very polite. There's video of it where he's just like, "How's it going? How are things? Sorry for bothering you." And that warranted an independent investigatory body coming in, a 35-page report.
35-page report plus exhibits, floor plans, audio recordings. They investigated phone calls to campus. This is campus police, so unarmed. It wasn't like the town police. This is campus police, a guy who'd been working there for 35 years. His name's Robert Young. Beloved, spotless record. He showed up, and I think he recognized the student. I heard he recognized her, and she was able to stay. So yeah, it was like they were really trying hard to prove that it was, in my opinion, and they weren't able to. The outside investigators said this is not an incident of racial bias, and yet they proceeded with all these initiatives. And
it's almost like it didn't matter what the event was. They wanted the anti-racism, which is just a name, by the way. They wanted the critical race theory policies in the school, and it sounds like they knew it was bunk, but they needed a pretext. And even though it was proven bunk, they moved forward anyway.
I think that's an accurate analysis.
So what ended up happening to you then?
So what happened to me was, meanwhile I'm in the library working on my rap, and so this happened on July 31st, and the orientation I was doing was happening in very early, like right after Labor Day, and so within a week of me doing this huge thing, organizing an event for 600 people, it's no small undertaking. I was told, my supervisor came in and said, you can't do this, you can't do a rap, and I said, why not? And he said, because you're white, and it would be seen as cultural appropriation. So,
did you try identifying as not white?
I did ask. I said,
You really
no.
did? I was kidding.
I didn't. I said. So if I was not white, or I said if I was a person of color, and I didn't indicate what color. I said if I was a person of color, would I be allowed to do it? And he said yes, without hesitation. So obviously, just anybody except for somebody who's white.
What about Eminem?
Ooh.
Did you tell him that?
Yeah.
Well,
One of the
did it.
most
Eminem's a white
prolific,
supremacist dude.
prolific
Oh,
actors of our time,
Yeah, seriously.
or
You mean
rappers of
musicians?
our time, rather.
I'm kidding, by the way.
He's
He's
a
not a
good
white
actor, too.
supremacist.
Well, I mean, yeah, people say that Macklemore, and I mean, of course, Tom McDonald, but I mean, really, rap is an American. It's an American art. It's culturally American. I think that's my view.
I don't understand
But
why we all can't just, appreciate. You know what I mean? Like,
It's actually like racist of me to try and play that game about what about a
Who-
white guy who did it too.
And
like,
wasn't-
you're right. It's an American art form.
who invented the
It is.
guitar? Where did the guitar come from? Huh?
Good question.
Who's using that? Or keyboards? Or turntables?
Jeez,
Who invented
in
the
Middle
record
East?
player?
Yeah.
Or the
Miller.
lute? Everybody,
Tesla? I don't know.
look. That's why I'm like, this stuff's really scary because it's kind of obvious. Let me ask you: your supervisor who came in and said you can't rap. Is this like a middle-aged white dude?
He's a white dude, but he's not middle-aged. He's younger than me, and he was actually the head of the search committee for the job I was up for. So it was
Wow.
very awkward.
Oh.
And
So- Was he woke?
I mean, I
Or
think
just a
he's
coward?
towing the line.
So coward?
I'm
You should don't answer that. Don't answer that. I personally do not respect individuals who would say something like that because I think what he said to you was extremely racist. Extremely
yes,
racist.
But it was so unhesitating. I mean, the manner in which he said it, and then followed up by an email. He memorialized this in an email, in writing. And then I went to the dean of the libraries and I said, what's going on? And she actually said to me something that was a veiled threat. Remember, I was up for a job, and she said, well, how you manage to be resilient in the face of this situation is really going to give us a lot of information in light of your candidacy for this job. It was something like that. I'm paraphrasing.
Wow.
So, I mean, to me, that's a veiled threat. And so the fact that they did it so blatantly and explicitly, I was genuinely confused. I was like, because when I heard about the student, all I heard was a black student was just lying on a couch in a house and somebody called the police on her. That's terrible. Like, that was the narrative that I heard. Right. I didn't really go, because there was no investigation. That's what the college told me. I really didn't have reason not to believe them at that point. So I was confused. I was like, well, this really feels like racial discrimination. He literally told me, because you're white, you can't do this job opportunity. And I wrestled with, well, should I file a complaint? I was like, but can white people be discriminated against? Like, is that possible? And I thought, well, gee, if I report it, I'll never get a job here because white people aren't supposed to complain about this stuff. They're not supposed to do that. And so it was a very hard for me emotionally to wrestle with what I was supposed to do with that. And what I ended up doing was I ended up leaving the library and moving to a different department on campus, thinking that I could get away from, because there was also lots of these discussions and dialogues that were happening even before this event had occurred that I just went along with. And again, I had no reason to believe, there's systemic racism. Okay. And I guess, as a white person, you're supposed to talk about your privilege and that's going to help somehow. So I thought, okay. But inside it always felt kind of disingenuous.
So you didn't quit at this point?
I left. I stayed at the school. Yeah, it's a long story. So I went to a different department, and I didn't know that this department, the Department of Residence Life, is very steeped in the social justice. That's one of its core values. And again, at the time, I thought, social justice. Yeah, I can get with that. I hadn't quite put all the pieces together. And I think this is part of the problem is a lot of people are genuinely confused.
You needed to be watching Timcast IRL,
I
obviously.
need-
Yeah, it's just,
I was
it's not
not
your
watching-
fault, though. I mean, a lot of
Sorry.
people don't know about how awesome. I'm kidding. Continue.
Yeah, I definitely need to be watching Timcast. So, I moved into this department, and other things started happening on campus. Like the campus police officer who showed up to that incident was terminated a year later. And this is a guy
For racism?
No, it was for undisclosed reasons.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And he was a 35-year veteran, about to retire, spotless police officer. He was beloved. We called him Officer Bob. He was there when I was a student there.
That's a Simpsons joke where they're like, he was 2 days away from retirement. Like they do that all the time. Like the dog gets hit by a car and like, he was 2 days away from retirement. Here's this cop. I mean, it's kind of, it's parody in and of itself. It's like life imitating art. It's so absurd.
Yeah, it's absurd. And it's tragic. Because the other thing that happened with this student was she made this Facebook post, and then she made she didn't know the name of the custodian. She couldn't identify the custodian who had called campus police on her. So she posted the photos and email addresses of 2 other unrelated, like people who were not involved. A dining room person and another custodian who wasn't even there. He'd left his shift for the day before it even happened. And the lives of those 2 people were, I think it was catastrophic. One of them, during the investigation, he was put on leave and a paid leave, and he ended up not coming back to the college. He had some pre-existing conditions, and it was too much. He didn't come back. And then the dining room worker was harassed. I mean, she got phone calls. She got notes in her home mailbox. Students would whisper and point at her, "There's the racist." She was then furloughed this past summer, and she applied for a job somewhere, and to make up for the loss of her temporary loss of her job at Smith. And the person who was hiring her said, "Weren't you the person that was involved with that student when they called the police?" And she was like, no. She tried to explain, and she didn't get the job. I mean, we can't know for sure that she didn't get the job for that reason. But
I would say yes, but what you need to understand, once the word gets out, you'll hear this. Look, I understand you weren't at fault, but I mean, we can't have those people coming after us. So I'm just sorry. You understand, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Once you're out there, you are unhireable. And it's not about whether they believe you or not. It's that they don't want you near their company.
So now you're waking up to the realities that are the cult of, wokeness, but you still work at the college.
I still work at the college. I'm starting to wake up. I'm starting to pay attention more. Some other things start happening around campus. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I'm trying, I took a lower paying position as doing administrative support. So I was no longer a teaching librarian. I was kind of like, I thought, I can hide down here. That's kind of what I thought. Very nuts and bolts, like getting students their IDs, getting them keys, very, very solid, practical kind of job. And yet, I was told I had to attend staff meetings where people were talking about identity. There was one staff meeting where we talked about how colonialism, white supremacy, examples of how white supremacy still manifests at the college. And one of my colleagues started banging on the table saying, rich white women. And he was talking about the alums. He was talking about the alums. And so nobody batted an eyelash. I'm like, this feels very this doesn't feel professional.
There was no, did they start banging on the table and chanting "Gooble gobble one of us" at you, trying to convince you to join the cult? Didn't happen. Because anybody who gets that reference, you deserve something. A present.
What is it?
I don't actually. It's from Thank you.
It's from the movie called Freaks. I think it's called Freaks. And there's this beautiful woman. She's trying to marry this freak who's got an inheritance. And so all the freaks at the table are chanting "Gooble gobble one of us," but she's not a freak, and so she's like, "No!" and she runs away screaming. Yeah,
that was me. I'm that woman.
So, but is that how you ended up quitting, or?
No. So then, I started gently. I felt gently talking to my supervisors, because the other thing they were asking me to do was to support a curriculum for students that was essentially telling students that you can break the world down into 2 groups of people: oppressed and oppressors. And oppressors are white and everyone else is oppressed. And I felt like that was really such a disservice to students. It made me very uncomfortable. It felt like the infantilization I was talking to Lydia about earlier of students, like telling students of color, like, you can't quite handle the world, and until your white counterparts start talking about their white privilege, nothing's going to happen for you. It was kind of this toxic dependency thing, and I just felt like it was incredibly disempowering to both white students and non-white students. And so I tried to raise this several times with my supervisor. Nothing happened. I finally just was like, I don't want to talk about my race at work. I started thinking, gee, you can't ask about race in a job interview. So how is it that this is a continued condition of my employment? So I was told we were going to go, this is the big event, we were going to go to a professional development retreat on campus. And the first day we would be discussing our identities. So I went to my supervisor and I said, and I knew that meant race, because that's usually what it means. And I said, I'm uncomfortable discussing my race at work. And she said, no problem. Just say that at the retreat. So I thought, okay. So I went to the retreat and everyone went around the table and we did the script talking about our race. And it was actually, they wanted us to talk about our race in the context of our childhood, no less. Race/culture. They were like conflating the two. And so I said, I'm uncomfortable talking about this at work. And then a little later, one of the hired facilitators said, I was the only one to abstain, by the way. One of the hired facilitators said, any white person who declines or exhibits discomfort, which I had, in discussing their race when requested is not actually uncomfortable. You might want to feel like you empathy for them, but don't. They're actually doing it. What they're doing is a power play, and it's called white fragility. And so they said this, and my heart just dropped because this was in front of all my colleagues. And that's when a line was crossed for me, because I realized this wasn't just, you can't just keep your head down and mouth shut in this environment. This is an environment in which now shame and public humiliation is being used as a tool to compel certain behavior, because they wanted me to talk about my race, and they wanted me to talk about it in a certain way. I answered the question authentically, which is, I am uncomfortable discussing my race. And that was not an acceptable response. So at that point, I knew I had to file a complaint, which brings me to filing the complaint with the officer in charge of making sure Smith complies with EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission laws. She has a JD. And when I went to file my complaint, I met with her, and she looked at me. She was rather incredulous, and she said, do you believe in white privilege? And I was like, what? And then she said, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was created to protect traditionally marginalized groups of people. So I interpret that to mean not me. And then the last thing she said was, I'm going to have to hire an outside investigator to deal with this if you're going to proceed with filing a complaint of racial discrimination and harassment. And I said, well, why is that? Aren't you the person that processes these complaints? And she said, yes, but this is different because you're white.
She literally said those words.
She literally said those words. She said that twice, two different occasions. And I followed them up with emails, of course, because by now I'm being very careful about paper trail and everything. So I filed the complaint. And I filed it, I think it was probably like a week before George Floyd was murdered. And so Smith went into hyperdrive after the July 31st, 2018 incident with the combating systemic racism stuff and all the initiatives. They went into super duper hyperdrive after George Floyd. And remember, this time, we're in a global pandemic. Nobody knows what's going on. Suddenly, everybody's like, the college is closed. Everyone's working from home. We're going to furlough all these people. Everyone's worried about their job. And the college comes out with this 4-page document called Toward Racial Justice at Smith, outlining further initiatives, including initiatives aimed at measuring pay across registers of identity. So we're talking about now it's being tied to your job performance. So at that point, I started sending emails to HR and other people asking, can you give me definitions of this stuff? Like, what do you mean by equity, and what does this mean? Because now you're telling me this is tied to my pay. And there was nothing happening. In the meantime, I was getting invited to white staff only meetings, and being told that letters from the president saying white people are especially responsible for combating racism and doing this work, and we all have to work and do this hard work. And it felt like it was just constant emails and constantly talking about being white and how responsible white people are for all of this racism and how horrible the systemic racism is, and how I need to do all this work. And by now, it's been made clear to me that it's not optional, right? I mean, they say, well, it's optional, but if I don't go, it's like clearly that could be interpreted as an act of aggression or a power play. So cut to October, I finally decided that I was in a bad state psychologically and physically, and I decided that my health was, the damage that I was causing to myself by remaining in this environment was worse than what might happen if I made a video about it. So I made a YouTube video, and that actually kind of just blew up. I didn't know what would happen.
Did you quit at this point?
No. You really want to get to the part where I quit? No, not
yeah,
yet.
kind of, I guess. But
Sorry.
not really. I'm just curious if, like, it
No,
sounds.
so-
I'll put it this way: it really does sound like you were constantly being pushed to your breaking point. And from what you're telling me, you're like, they told me I had to say this, and I'm like, wow, surely that made you quit. But hearing that each and every beat in the story, you're like, you stayed through it.
I tried, yeah, because I was going through all the internal channels of trying. I was a good faith effort on my part. I thought, well, surely if I show them that this is wrong, surely they will be like, oh, maybe we should review our policies, or, oh, gee, this is hurting. A staff member is coming telling us this is hostile and she's being hurt. Like, surely we should listen to this person. I no longer have faith in Smith College, but I still had some faith at the time that perhaps, and I also knew I needed to exhaust my internal remedies too. So I made some videos, and I got put under investigation, like within a month, for an unrelated thing, and then they found me not guilty of whatever it was I was under investigation for. It was a slap on the wrist.
Do you know what the investigation was for?
Yeah, we had received, after I made the video, we received a bunch of emails to my department, to the departmental email, which I respond to. A bunch of people respond to it, and it was like, Jodi Shaw's a white supremacist. She went on Tucker, because I went on Tucker Carlson after I made the video. She's associated with a white supremacist, therefore you should fire her. And so I was forwarding these emails to my personal account because I'm documenting everything by now. And they said one of those emails contained student information. I'm not clear on what they didn't tell me which email it was, and I wasn't able to determine which email they meant. But it was a slap on the wrist, and then it was like, okay. You can come back to work. And it felt like that was a hard choice, whether or not to go back, or I'm not going to talk about there were some settlement negotiations, which I won't get into, but it felt like going back into an abusive relationship. And I thought I wouldn't go back into an abusive relationship. So I can't go back. And that's when I resigned.
I can't believe you made it that far.
I can't either.
But I absolutely can empathize. When I worked for Fusion, they had an event where they had all of their stars, their personalities, hosting a specific event, except for one person. And well, I should say, I'm not going to pretend like I deserve to be a part of all of the big productions from this Disney corporate cable channel. But I did question why it was they brought in an outside personality who was black to be involved in an event when I was actually on staff under contract to be one of their hosts. And I don't care about the race of the individual. My question was, why hire someone from the outside if you're paying me to do this? And I was told explicitly by the president, it's because you are white. And I said, don't you know that I am not? And he says, you look too white. And I said, I come from everybody knows this by now, especially people who watch the show, second generation mixed race family. And he was like, I get it, man. The company's racist. He told me that. And you know what? I did try to quit, but I never filed a complaint. Hindsight being 2020, I wonder if I really should have. If I should have gone, because maybe at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. But you mentioned something really interesting early on when you said that, you as a white person, you had this idea that like you don't complain about these things when they criticize you or they negatively impact your life based on you being white or whatever. White people don't complain. And it was interesting for me because I didn't look at I've never had like a white racial history or identity or anything like that. Because I grew up in a mixed race area with a bunch of different friends of different races. And I had a mom who made bulgogi for dinner. But when I heard this, I had a more libertarian gut reaction of, you do you, I'll do me, break my contract. They refused to do it. They told me, you're under contract for another year. Why don't we just wait things out and see how it goes? And so in the meantime, I was getting paid well and I didn't have any obligations with the company. They told me just do whatever because they didn't want the problems, I guess. The company wasn't always woke. They decided to get woke. And then, I wonder now if I had just been more aware of what was going on. This is back in, I think, 2015. Maybe I could have, filed a complaint that could have preempted something like what you went through. Maybe if we were all in this a little earlier and aware of what was going on. But it didn't mean anything to me. It was just a one-off event in my life. I didn't realize at the time we had seen, we were seeing Gamergate, right, the start of this culture war. Now we can see how bad it's really gotten. So tell me now. So you ended up resigning, and you ended up raising what, like $300,000?
Yeah.
Was it a GoFundMe?
Yeah. What's that all about? What's going on? What's this money for? You're gonna buy a Jeep? Or
Lamborghini?
Something? Yeah.
No. Well, the money is for. I mean, anything. It's the GoFundMe is complicated, but the GoFundMe was started because I was quitting my job and I wasn't gonna have income. And I'm going up against an extremely powerful institution that has a $2 billion endowment and has hired a very expensive attorney. And yeah, that's what the money's for. And actually, my goal was 150, and anything over 150 actually is going into a fund. I'm working out the details now for other people who are in similar situations. And then I cut that off at 290. So now it's going back to me because I realize now how little 150 actually is, in spite of what people think. It's actually not that much. It's not
a lot.
It's not that much money, especially since this is my job now. And there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of organizing, in the background and a lot of work, and it's not that much money.
You need $1 million. And I'm not exaggerating, and people need to realize this. Listen up, everybody. Lawsuits are expensive, okay? And especially you're going up against this university, or is it college?
College, yeah.
They're going to have tremendous resources. And each and every one of these woke individuals can put money towards this university if they want to. But the university itself has more resources than an individual. These lawsuits, when it comes to defamation, going up against the establishment, you're going to spend $250,000 in a couple months. You look at just a simple defamation case. It was Carl Benjamin and Akilah Hughes, and I think that cost Carl somewhere around like $120,000, if that. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm getting the number wrong. Court fees alone was like $40,000. Then he had his legal fees, his lawyer fees, and that's just two individuals going over one small defamation case. You're talking about, you filed an EEOC complaint.
Yes.
For racial discrimination.
Yes.
And so I'll ask a couple questions. Are you allowed to talk about this? Are you going to be filing a suit privately outside of the EEOC?
That remains to be seen. The EEOC is the first step. It's a requirement, though.
Yeah.
So. And
then I assume when you filed your complaint, you provided testimony, a sworn affidavit.
No, not yet. That doesn't happen with the EEOC.
Oh, okay.
That would happen if I file a civil suit, though.
What is EEOC?
Good question. EEOC. It's the Equal Employment
Opportunity Commission?
Yes.
It's like a government agency?
It is, and they have a state level and a federal level, and I believe in Massachusetts, where I am, it gets cross-filed with the federal government. So that is the first step. And so right now, I did file the complaint, and Smith College has a certain time limit to respond. So we get to see how they're going to defend. We get to get a little insight into how they might defend themselves against these claims.
So you file the complaint first. Is the EEOC going, assuming they take your case, have they, or do we know that yet, or what?
Well, we're waiting for, they have to wait for the
response.
response from Smith. And then I think, I'm not a lawyer, I think they can choose to investigate it if they decide it has merit, or I don't know what their criteria is. But either way, I think you can get a right to sue letter. You can sue in state court or in the federal level. There's a different waiting period for each. And I think you can do that regardless of whether or not the EEOC decides to investigate. But I'm not exactly sure about that.
I'm worried that with Joe Biden coming in and the rule changes from the Department of Education, that they're going to tell you to buzz off.
Yeah, there's another administrative agency called the Office of Civil Rights, the OCR, and I just heard a story recently about a woman who was having similar situation. She's white, and so she filed a complaint with the OCR, and the OCR, this was during Trump, and the OCR determined that this is a hostile work. I forget exactly what it was, but they said, yeah, this is wrong. Whatever's going on in this workplace is wrong, and they issued a letter to the employer, and they said, here are the steps you need to do to correct the situation. It wasn't even like I don't think she was suing it wasn't even a lawsuit for money or anything. It was just like fix the situation. And then Biden moved into office and the OCR rescinded that.
Yep.
I think that was in the New York Post recently, that story. So that is concerning. I mean, as you know, he rescinded Trump's EO, which was essentially just restating we have a Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was just restating it, really.
I'll tell you what I think one of the problems is. A lot of conservatives seem to think that Donald Trump needed to do all the work for him. And not just conservatives. Conservatives had been the one paying attention to this more than liberals were. Like, in the story you told, you were kind of unaware of what's going on. I told a similar story in 2014. Conservatives have seen this and have been railing on it for some time. Then moderates got roped in, and now many liberals, people like Barry Weiss, for instance, are complaining about what happened at the New York Times. And you have anti-woke leftists even now criticizing the establishment and what they call neoliberalism. The problem is a lot of conservatives thought Donald Trump was the answer. I'm not saying every single one, or at least they thought Trump would be some kind of assistance. And they're not entirely wrong. Trump did come in, and he did eventually sign, enact this executive order. But it took James Lindsay and Christopher Rufo going on, shows, Christopher Rufo going on Tucker Carlson and saying this is a problem for Trump to enact this, in the last several months of office. The issue is these government agencies had been doing absolutely racist practices. In one instance, there was there was a certain laboratory sent all the white people on a retreat to talk about whiteness and white privilege and why it's, bad and things like that. We've seen many stories like that. Christopher Rufo documents all of these, and there's a bunch of examples. Every single one of those people needed to file a lawsuit. They needed to do what you are doing right now. So what ends up happening is we have years of this, and we have many people complaining about it. But where are the people actually filing the suits, challenging these institutions on, was it Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act? You cannot discriminate on the basis of race and gender and national origin and things like that. When I saw Donald Trump was enacting this executive order, I thought to myself, he shouldn't have to do this. It's already illegal. It's interesting. We had a leftist on this show who argued that Trump was banning, free speech and that it was wrong to do this. And I'm like, it's already illegal to do these programs. You cannot take a bunch of white people off to a retreat and tell them white people are bad. That violates the law. The law says race. The law doesn't say marginalized groups. You can argue the spirit or the intent, but it doesn't matter. We have these laws for a reason. Joe Biden has come in, rescinded the executive order, and it doesn't change the fact it's still illegal. That means every single person who works in the government, works in these universities, or is affected by the wokeness needs to be filing a lawsuit today against these institutions for what they're doing. Why aren't they doing it?
Well, we talked about money.
That's true.
That's a huge thing. I mean, really, it's even before that. The question is why. I mean, I feel like more people are speaking out, but I mean, people don't even talk about it, let alone file a lawsuit. I mean, that's a big step. That's a commitment. And litigation is difficult.
Definitely.
We do have some other lawsuits going on in this country, though. We have Clark v. Democracy Prep in Nevada, which is a school case. It's a K through 12 charter school. The Gabrielle's son is a senior, and he was forced. I mean, they said they would give him a D- if he didn't profess his
Is this the
identities.
biracial?
Yes.
So we actually have
He
this.
looks white. He's like you.
Well, that's a really, there's a really funny thing about that. Whether I'm white appearing or not depends on the race of the individual. No joke. So in my experience, I've been called Hispanic more than anything else. Latino. I had a guy at Occupy Wall Street refer to me as his Puerto Rican brother, and I'm like, bro, I'm not Hispanic. I mean, I know like a tiny bit of Spanish because I grew up in Chicago. But I was in Anaheim, and I had the guys from Telemundo walk up to me speaking Spanish, just assuming I was, Latino to a certain extent. And so it really is in the eye of the beholder. The funny thing is, if I agree with the woke, all of a sudden they can see that I'm not white. And they say, see, it's because you understand. If I disagree with them, they say, you're white. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, because it's not really about skin color, is it? It's about politics.
Yeah, it's about whether you are in the cult or not. So let me jump to this story. We have this from the Atlanta Black Star. They say black mom sues school after she says biracial son received failing grade in sociology class for refusing to confess his white dominance. A black mom is suing her biracial son's Nevada charter school after she claims he received a failing grade for refusing to link aspects of his identity to oppression and dominance in a sociology class. Gabrielle Clark and her son William Clark filed a suit in U.S. District Court of Nevada against public charter school Democracy Prep Agassi campus in Vegas on December 22nd, alleging a violation of constitutional free speech and due process rights. William Clark claims that in that class, Sociology of Change, taught by Catherine Bass, who was named as a defendant in the suit, he was harassed and punished for refusing to attach derogatory labels to aspects of his identity. Clark, whose deceased father was white, is generally regarded as white by his peers, according to the complaint, and has green eyes and blondish hair. The far-right advocacy group International Organization for the Family, which has been tracking the case closely, reports that a U.S. District Court judge said at a February 22nd temporary restraining order hearing, I think William is likely to succeed on the merits of his compelled speech claims, saying that the defendants will have to find a way to justify the critical race theory curriculum under a strict scrutiny test, adding that's a very high bar to meet. In the class taught by Bass, a self-described white Irish American citizen, Clark was allegedly forced to reveal his race, gender, sexual and religious identities and attach labels to the identities, which the lawsuit claims violated his right to privacy. An instructional slide included in court documents displays dominant groups in American culture as white, male, middle upper class, heterosexual, and Protestant Christian, while everyone else is categorized as submissive. Labels like white are associated by Bass with privilege, while words like female and working class are associated with oppressive. It's really twisted, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a particularly egregious, but this is happening all over the place, and Gabrielle Clark stood up and said, no thanks, I'm not going to do this. I was given a similar, one of my colleagues was like, offered to help educate me, and I took her up on it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna have an open mind, and she handed me a worksheet, and it did have the oppressed. It was 2 columns, oppressed, and it was dominant group and subordinated group. And the dominant group only had like one thing, like race was white, gender male, religion Christian, and then over here you had all like everybody else in the entire world, and I was like, wow. That was very reductionist view of the world, but it's very similar to what William experienced. And I think he was the only white presenting person in his class too, which made it especially.
Have you ever taken the privilege test? Where it's like a slider bar and it's like, how white are you? How Christian are you? How old are you?
Oh,
What's
the
your
intersectionality score?
Yeah,
thing?
something like that. Then it's
Online.
like, you are 74 points privileged out of 100. You are very privileged or whatever.
Yeah.
That's basically what they're doing. Have you ever seen that image of the 3 people staying at the fence for the equality versus equity?
Of course.
The amazing thing about that is its manipulation. It's the insidiousness of it, where they show that to children and they explain very simply, hey, we can give, one of the boxes from the tall guy to the short guy so they can all see, right? Well, that's simple. It makes sense. But what happens when you're dealing with race and orientation and national origin and religion? it's impossible to quantify how standing on top of religion allows you to see a baseball game. So these are the kinds of manipulative tactics they use where you kind of understand it. But here's what I truly despise about this. That equality versus equity argument is about wealth, not race. The person everyone who gets access to a box to stand on is their access to resources. Giving the shorter person 2 boxes is giving them access to resources to help them. The argument that we actually need to be having is about class issues. Well, they do mention working class and middle upper class as part of the oppression scale. But when they make everything about your race, that in my opinion, is meant to disrupt actual, what's the right word for it? I guess social justice, real social justice. Oprah all of a sudden becomes oppressed. She's a billionaire. And then a white homeless veteran is now an oppressor because he's white.
Yeah, it's like saying Oprah Winfrey has more in common with somebody living in, is it East?
Like the Marcy Projects in New York.
Yeah, than a wealthy white person. I mean, clearly that's a false.
But that's the kind of narrative they use. Like they used it with Serena Williams when she had. So she's the famous tennis player. When she had a bout of rage, you know, with all due respect, she got angry and she like bounced her tennis racket or something like that. They penalized her for it. And then there was this big narrative that the only reason they did it was because she was a black woman and that they were basically attacking her as the trope of the angry black woman, as opposed to the fact that she just acted out in violation of the rules. And to act like one of the most famous, celebrated, and wealthy athletes in the world is in any way oppressed is just shockingly, I don't know, ignorant in my opinion. But I think it's part of the weaponization that we see from a lot of people. I mean, heaven forbid, there's a large push towards, you know, stripping away the resources of corrupt politicians who somehow make millions of dollars off of their office when they're getting a salary for $174,000 a year and then all of a sudden become worth $50 million or $5 million or whatever. They don't want you to come after them. So they'll say, hey, don't look at me. It's the white guy. Go yell at that guy in the gutter who's, you know, shoveling garbage for a living. He's the real oppressor. They teach it in schools.
Just like Jackie Blair is the dining person who was falsely accused is the real oppressor.
Yeah, the janitor.
Yeah, it makes it. This is truly. I mean, people say it all the time. This divide and conquer, like, it makes it impossible for us to organize along class lines. And really, if we were really talking about power, if that's the conversation we want to have, then we need to be talking about class.
Definitely. I see it. It's really interesting. Donald Trump called for $2,000 checks for everybody in the stimulus, and it was the Republican Party that said no. And it shows you that Donald Trump really was an insurgent in the Republican Party. They did not like what he had to offer. And then after Donald Trump says $2,000 checks, Joe Biden's like $1,400. You know, he's like, okay, so we already gave you the $600. We're only going to give you $1,400 right now. But there's something interesting about Trump supporters and left populists in that I don't think Trump supporters care all that much about billionaires. I think there's certainly a conservative argument against giving the government too much power. So when they talk about wealth taxes, right, it's a big thing we see on the left, the Bernie Sanders crowd. They want a wealth tax. You know, I thought about this. Are you familiar with the wealth tax?
Is that Yang?
It's Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, okay. Yes, right. The billionaire tax or something.
The way it works is they treat wealth like property and tax a percentage of your hard wealth you got to pay for. Now, I've been very critical of this because it makes literally no sense. You know, Jeff Bezos, for instance, I think his total income from Amazon is like $1.3 million per year. His net worth, however, is like 160 billion or whatever or more at this point because Amazon's, you know, gaining a lot of value because of the pandemic. But he can't sell that stock. There's like thresholds and contractual agreements to where he can finally liquidate some of those assets. That means what? If they implement this wealth tax, they're like, Bezos will pay, you know, $3 billion a year, but he's worth, you know, 100 and something billion. And it's like, okay, well, where does that $1 billion come from? The government doesn't want stock in Amazon, and he can't give it up anyway. It's a violation of the contract. The wealth tax makes no sense. He doesn't have the cash to actually pay for it. We hear a lot from the left, well, then he should sell his assets. I'm like, he legally can't. The wealth tax makes no sense. At this point, however, I'm kind of like, I don't care. Do it. Let's see what happens. I don't care about Jeff Bezos, Mackenzie Bezos. The only thing where I'm kind of like, I don't know, Elon Musk probably deserves to have a lot of money because that guy's building starships and Starlink and other useful things. Bezos, I don't like. Soros, I don't like. The Koch brothers, the Mercers, any one of these billionaires, I don't like. I think they flood money into politics. They subvert the will of the working class. And I think many Trump supporters would much prefer working class individuals have their say-so as opposed to billionaires, namely George Soros, who they criticize all the time. But I think we can throw out all the names of Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, left-wing billionaires, right-wing billionaires. I don't care for any one of these billionaires. I think we do need to have a reckoning on class issues. The problem is critical race theory disrupts that. The culture war disrupts that. And I think we have a really strong opportunity right now with Biden in office to actually look at some of these anti-woke leftists, many socialists and progressives, and be like, which part can we agree on where we think the billionaires are disrupting the will of the working class and kind of like put a stop to that? You know what I mean? I think, and we've mentioned this many times, critical race theory was introduced by powerful interests who knew it could distract the masses and create a fight that protects them. Right? So there's this comic we love to reference on the show where it's a rich guy in his office. Everything's really pretty. Outside is an Occupy Wall Street protester holding a big sign saying Occupy Wall Street. And the rich guy's on the phone smiling saying, introduce them to identity politics. And that's really what it feels like, because I was at Occupy when this happened. It went from, people like Luke Rutkowski, who was on the show for a couple of months. Maybe he'll come back. We'll see. Luke, where are you at?
Luke.
Where are you at? But he's a center-right libertarian. I'm center-left libertarian. But we agree on these libertarian issues, not liking the elites, the authoritarians. And we met at Occupy Wall Street because these people were down there until the critical race theorists show up and started segregating people based on race. And then you saw people leave and get angry. That was the ultimate slap in the face and the insult, especially to a lot of younger, white, idealistic individuals who are now being told it was their fault. And they're like, yo, I'm here at Occupy Wall Street with you. It's like, too bad.
That happened to me literally. I went to Occupy Wall Street with the Constitution. I was going to read it. And they were like, hey, the news is here. I was like, oh, good. I'll go get on the news and tell them about the Constitution and how we need to break the Federal Reserve up. They're like, no, there's too many white people have spoken to the news. I just lost my mind. I got on stage and screamed that I'm not white. And no one is black or white. These shades don't exist in our pigmentation or our skin color. And people looked at me like dumbfounded.
That's
and then the next girl that went up
colorblindness.
was like, I am a black woman who, and I was just like, I give up on this. I give up. I can't fight the crowd. You have to find another way. But man, it is being silent's not the answer.
It was a brilliant attack vector, in my opinion, accusing people who oppose racism of being the true racists.
Yeah, you know what? The other problem is the left-right thing. Just the massive fear of people on the, and I know the terms are probably meaningless. That's kind of the point. But people, or classical liberals, right, who are on the left, who are like, the ground has now shifted.
Well, hold on. Classical liberal is a right-wing position.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so people confuse the tradition, like the actual classical liberalism of like John Locke, with saying 90s Democrat liberal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Yeah.
problem.
So
Right and left is another attack vector thing.
Right.
Doesn't really exist.
Well,
Yeah,
it
that's
does.
what I'm- yeah.
It
They use
does.
those words to
But
divide
the
us.
colloquialisms of left and right are confused and meaningless. So there's social liberalism, which is like Democrats in the 90s, slightly
That's
left.
what I mean. Social liberalism.
Right.
Like, so okay.
This is the liberalism of like Martin Luther King Jr. Expanded civil rights, civil rights protections, and social programs. But social liberalism is not social democracy or democratic socialism or socialism. Social liberalism is like center left, meaning some programs sometimes. And then classical liberalism is like not that many programs, but maybe a little
that's
bit.
right. Classical liberalism is like smaller government.
Yeah,
right?
it's very much like libertarianism.
Yeah.
And then social liberalism is you think we should have the 1964 Civil Rights Act. You think unemployment benefits and a social safety net is a good thing. I believe all of those things. I just think conservatives have fair criticisms of these programs in that they become bloated, congested, and corrupt over too long. And so we need to reassess.
I think
and fix
liberal
these.
and conservative is another attack vector thing dividing us because I'm both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It really, and I see there's so many people. I mean, like, I know you all know this well, but I was still a little surprised when I went on Tucker Carlson. I made my video and I said in my video, I'm a lifelong liberal. And I went on Tucker and Tucker's like, lifelong liberal, Jodi Shaw. How many emails I got afterwards saying, I was with you, but then you went on Tucker. And he's right wing, so I'm not with you anymore, even though my message had not changed at all. And so that's when I realized this is a big problem, is that people who otherwise would be able to see this stuff in their midst, the CRC stuff, and be like, well, this is wrong, but they're still kind of confused. If they're so scared of if they go off the script of being associated with the right. And that fear is so big. I mean, it's like an epithet to be called right wing to some liberals.
Identity politics. To say I am a fill in the blank is identity politics. To say I am center is identity politics. I am left, identity. I am a Democrat, identity. That's identity crap.
Yes, we need to drop it.
There's a quote from Andrew Breitbart that I think you should hear. I wonder what your opinion is on Andrew Breitbart.
I don't know. Yes, he's Breitbart magazine, right? Steve
website.
Bannon.
He passed some years ago, but he said, "Walk toward the fire. Don't worry about what they call you. All those things are set against you because they want to stop you in your tracks. But if you keep going, you're sending a message to people who are rooting for you, who are agreeing with you. The message is that they can do it too."
Love it.
There was another quote which was either a derivative of this or spawned from it, where that I've often misattributed to Breitbart, but it's similar. Walk towards the fire. People think that once you get to the fire, you'll be burned, but in reality, you'll pass through and see freedom on the other side.
Yeah, I've heard that quote before. That's true.
Right.
I think that I've experienced that.
So these people are scared, and there's a lot of like moderate leftist personalities, and I shouldn't say leftist, like traditional and classical liberal types that are absolutely terrified of finding themselves in league with conservatives.
Yes.
But if you live that way, then you're living on your knees. So I don't care. I had there's probably some hit piece coming out about me soon, probably. And I get this thing where they're like, Tim Pool has hosted Alex Jones and Enrique Tarrio. And these people, they like to do this thing where they're like, here's a photo of Tim Pool sitting down at a bar with the alt-right. And I'm like, uh-huh. And I don't care. I really don't. They come at me and they're like, can you explain this photo, Tim? Yeah, I talk to people. That's about it. I'll talk to whoever I feel like talking about. I don't care about what they call me. I don't care about what they think. I literally do not care. Mm-hmm. I just don't. And if you do, you are being held back because they have no control over you. They don't. Now, look, I get it. I think there's a lot of people who are like, I don't want to lose my job. I'm comfortable. But if you think keeping your head down will keep you safe, you are wrong. They will come for you eventually. I mean, you kind of explained that in your story before where you thought if you just went along with things and kind of kept your head down, that's how you felt.
Yeah, they will come for you. I mean, you can't, it's getting to a point where it's compelled. I mean, look at the Clark v. Democracy. That's about compelled speech. We are now not talking about like suppression of speech. We're talking about you're going to be asked to say things that you do not necessarily believe in as a continued condition of your employment or you're getting a good grade.
You're going to lose your job unless you bend the knee. So if you would rather live on your knees than fight on your feet, well, then so be it. That's what you deserve, and it's what you want, and far be it from me to criticize you for doing it.
No, you should criticize because that lends to the problem. It exacerbates the problem. No. Don't do it.
Listen, I'm not here to recreate the environment they've created. They want to create this environment where they terrify you into dropping to your knees. I don't want to create an environment where you're terrified of my side. I'm going to tell you this. You do your thing. If you do right, I've got your back. But if you want to live on your knees, I'm not going to criticize you or pressure you. I mean, no, I'll criticize you. I'll criticize you. But I'm not going to create the same environment where you are not welcome. If you want to live in this world where you are at the behest of the woke cult with no real ideology, just strange, do as the tribe says or else, that's up to you. You're welcome to come on the show.
If you want to taste it, yeah. If you want to taste it and then come tell your personal story about how bad it sucked, go for it. But don't do it. Get up off your feet.
I think it's very simple.
Off your knees?
I grew up in Chicago.
Off your toes.
Off your toes. I grew up super far left. I was a skateboarder. I was an anarchist. I was listening to all the punk rock music. And then like I thought I hated the system. I had been messed with by cops before. So I was all just like, cops are corrupt. The system is broken. It's terrible. The war machine. And then I got older and realized there's nuance and ways to deal with these problems. But having grown up kind of in not necessarily the gutter, but in a sense, guttery conditions. I've also been homeless a couple times. There's nothing anyone can take from me. I don't care. You have nothing over me. Oh, you can take my job away? So what? What's the worst case scenario? Been there, done that. I'm not worried about it. And so I'm free to speak my mind. I'm not scared. But there are a lot of people who are scared because they're going to lose everything.
Well, also because there's that fire, this fear. It's not just about losing your job. It's about literally being cast out of your herd. And I think that's partially, Tim smirking, I think partially that's why this ideology is so effective. It hooks into this, that's a primal fear. Like getting cast, you're going to get eaten by a lion.
Exactly.
Ostracization.
Humans are social.
Shaming. And
Yes. We are social creatures and we survive with cooperation. So when you're out on your own, you are in a very risky position. But together, we're strong. The threat is you will be excised. Well, let me tell everybody who's listening. There's very clearly an infrastructure built where you will survive opposing the cult of wokeness. We're all here. We're having a good time. In fact, I got to tell you, I'm doing all right for myself. I love when they try claiming grifter, right? I'm sure they call you a grifter because you raised all this money.
Yes.
What's easier? Losing your job, freaking out your friends, becoming a social pariah in your industry, in your community, or going along, pushing the narrative and just milking it for all it's worth? What's safer? Being a woke neoliberal leftist promoting Joe Biden and the Democrat message to make money on the platforms that you have no risk of being banned for, or challenging the system and facing a real risk of getting your shows deleted every single day, or getting fired from your job and crossing your fingers that there will be people who agree with you to donate to your GoFundMe. They call you a grifter, yet at the same time, they do literally the same thing, plus they have institutional support. Not only do these woke leftists who try and pull some BS at schools, they've raised $80,000 in several instances. They've raised tens of thousands of dollars. They then get propped up by magazines, by newspapers. These same people can appear on Jimmy Kimmel and these late night shows. They're not going to do that for you. Tucker Carlson will. And then people will get freaked out. So which is easier? You want to talk about the real grift? It's the YouTubers who are on the left. It's the YouTubers who toe the party line and the establishment line, knowing they will never get banned for this and have nothing to worry about and can milk it for all it's worth, even when they put out fake news. The real risk, they call it the grift. They're only saying that because they want to stop you dead in your tracks, like Breitbart said. Now, speaking out against the establishment is risky as you can get, because we know people get banned, they get shut down. I mean, GoFundMe froze your account for an administrative reason, mind you. But GoFundMe has deleted the fundraisers for many conservatives. It's not a grift.
Yeah, it's interesting though how it gets framed. You're talking about these other YouTubers, these social justice warriors. They frame it as if they're counterculture, they're fighting against the power, and it's like I don't know if it's hard for me to believe that they don't understand that they are part of the power, that this is the establishment.
They are literally the power. It's like, since when was the group aligned with the major political parties, well, the Democrats at least, and like Coca-Cola, the resistance? Yeah, that's right. Coca-Cola, Nike, and the companies.
And the ACLU. I mean, just about every major institution in this country and every major news outlet, just about mainstream media.
I really, really love wokeness in these companies that use slave labor. Because it's just like, they're like, we're here because we think racism is wrong. Meanwhile, they're literally operating sweatshops that pay like $0.25 an hour or whatever. Just like awful conditions, hiring paramilitary groups to go in and suppress workers' rights groups in foreign countries.
Although those,
amazing.
Obviously, that's not a principled stance. That's just business tactics. But I mean, I often wonder about, the true believers. I remember at Smith, I could kind of get an, I talked to a lot of people in hallways, but I could kind of, if you can kind of tell who the true believers are. You kind of just get a vibe, when you're talking about the stuff and the eye contact. I think it's a very small percentage.
I don't think there is such thing as true believers.
Well, Gandhi was.
No, I think there's just like mindless tribal zealots. And what they really believe is look, there's nothing to believe in critical race theory. The theory itself makes no sense. I'll give you an example. 6 months ago, Asians were white. They were called white adjacent. They were called literally white. The argument was that white is a social structure and not a race. Therefore, Asians were white. We were joking on this show in response to the narrative. I was double white. Well, then something changed. And now, these hate crimes started happening. because of the the COVID stuff and for a variety of reasons. Now there's the Stop Asian Hate movement, which good, mind you, I respect that. I think hate crimes are wrong. But now all of a sudden Asians are minorities again. So what happened is you have some individuals. There's one woman who at her school, she's a member of a school board, I think in like Sacramento, was disparaging Asians, calling them racial slurs. Well, because it was allowed in 2016. Asians were white. Universities were discriminating against them legally because they were overprivileged. Now that that's changed, they're calling for her resignation, but she's a black woman. So there are people like James Lindsay who point out when a black woman is getting canceled for racism towards Asian, the structure is inverting. It's like collapsing on itself. I don't necessarily think it's collapsing. I think it's just proof that there are literally no ideals or principles, and they can change on a dime to fit the needs of the cult. So they'll say 6 months ago, well, no, Asians aren't actually minorities. They're privileged white people that make tons of money and they go to universities. Hate crimes happen. Now it's beneficial to them again. They change the narrative and sacrifice their own zealots who believed their own narratives. So there's no core ideology. There's no true believers, just tribal zealots who will do whatever the tribe says, which is why it's very difficult to interview these people outside of their safe spaces.
Do you think that's why I've been wondering about the popularity of zombie movies for a long time? And
right to the analogy.
I think I've been wondering, like, why are zombie movies so popular? I started thinking this a few years ago, and now I'm like, maybe it has something to do with this.
They have deep down, they have a desire to just be the zombie. They we all watch zombie movies terrified, and they watch it longingly, like, oh, to be a zombie and just not have a brain anymore and not have to think.
The CDC's been putting out zombie stuff about zombies, and like I think it's a dehumanization effort, maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously, I don't know. But like,
I think that's a joke.
If people start starving and are on the street eating other human bodies because they're starving to death, and then it's like it's okay to kill them because they're zombies.
I think CDC is trying to be silly and put out a joke.
Yeah, like
really?
in the Holodomor in the USSR in like the, I don't know, was what 30s or 40s or something, 50s maybe. The people were starving to death and eating humans.
Yes,
and it was
that's
that
true,
happens. So I think that it is a desensitization movement. Maybe not. Maybe it's intentional. I never thought it was before.
I think you're reading way too much into a joke.
It's so weird that I went so deep on that.
I don't know. I think there is something incredibly dehumanizing about CRT.
Definitely.
It reduces us to racial objects or commodities even.
It treats you like a member of a hive collective that has no individuality. And that
right.
It's really interesting. It's almost like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. These people almost just, I mean, they obviously care about themselves. They want power for themselves. But they get sacrificed, like I mentioned, that woman on the school board now being told to resign because of anti-Asian, racism. They don't care. The hive will cut off whatever it needs to gain power. So when you join this, you are quite literally a mindless cog, a mindless gnat swarming in the hive, whose strength is derived from each individual cog. But they'll swat you and destroy you.
I was thinking about
well, the interesting thing is, I wonder about this. I think there are a lot of lines as to what divides the culture war: authoritarian versus libertarian, nationalist versus globalist, collectivist versus individualist, and ideologue versus like pragmatist or things like this. And there's no clear dividing line. They all play a role in this. But I will say, there are many people who are, when you say true believers, I don't think they actually believe in anything other than they're a part of the cult. So that's what I want to clarify. They obviously believe in the cult, but there's no real ideology or principles to believe in. The structure is amorphous and makes little sense. But they are propped up by cowards, by people who say, I'm going to keep my head down and I'll be fine. They won't be. They'll sacrifice their own. Obama called it a circular firing squad. So they're only propped up by two groups of people, in my opinion. For one, they have their ranks for sure, but the two people are those who are mindless, ignorant to what's going on. They have no idea. And so they're just like, I don't know, whatever. You see these people on Twitter saying cancel culture is not real. And there's like regular people I see like on Instagram. There's a skateboarding account, one of the most prominent in the world, called The Barracks. And they tweeted, what are your thoughts on cancel culture? And I saw some like 17-year-old kid who's like a skateboarder saying cancel culture is not real. The kid has no idea what he's talking about. His photos were like fishing and skateboarding. Clearly, he's not experienced or watched anything that's going on. So he genuinely doesn't believe it. And so he jumps in and defends them ignorantly. But then you have people who know exactly what's happening and are like, well, I'd rather be on this side because I think they're going to win. In the end, they won't, but they're hoping that when the dust settles and the conflict ends, I'll tell you this. These people have one thing right. We, the people who believe in individual liberties and freedoms and civil rights, we're the good guys. Historically, the ones who fought for civil rights, freedom, liberty, etc., have always been the good guys, at least in recent history. And they know if we win, they'll be fine. What are we going to do? You know, some woke person comes out and goes, I was wrong about being woke. I'm so sorry. Yep, guess what? All the anti-woke people are going to be like, thank you. But what happens to the anti-woke should the woke win? What do you think? Yeah, I saw that
grimace.
The grimace.
Yeah, it's not just what's going to happen to the anti-woke; it's going to happen to the woke too.
Absolutely.
I mean, we see cultural revolutions. I mean, all the intelligentsia.
I'll call this
gone.
it's something I've brought up before, but I'll call it the intersectionalist wager. If you are anti-woke and the anti-woke win, you're fine. If you are woke and the anti-woke win, you are fine. But if you are woke and if you are woke and the woke win, you're at risk, but you're going to keep your head down. Hopefully you'll be safe. But if you're anti-woke and the woke win, they'll come for you and they'll destroy your life. So ultimately you look at this equation and you have many people saying the safer bet is to pretend to be woke, because in the event that the anti-woke side wins, they're not going to do anything bad to me. But if you challenge wokeness, the woke will absolutely destroy you.
I think it's a bad bet.
I agree. I think, more importantly, whether it's a bad bet or not, I think there's reasons to believe it is. I just think it's morally unsound, and I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And how about another great quote from Zapata, or what's his name? Zapato? What's his name? Emilio Zapatistas.
Oh, that weird last name, yeah.
He said, I would rather be a slave to principles than a slave to men. And that guy's a leftist. That guy was a socialist revolutionary. But those quotes are meaningful. So I wonder, will you just bend the knee and be a servant to this cult?
You know, I was thinking about identity because I was talking poorly about it earlier, about like, I'm on the left, I'm a Democrat, whatever. And it's insanity to like stake who you are based off of some label. But in the same rate, I'm a Crossland. That's my last name. I'm a human. That's an identity. I'm playing identity games when I say I'm a human.
Identity is a real thing, dude.
Yeah, and it keeps us sane. So these people are like finding sanity in identifying with a group. Now, I think it's too meticulous to say the color of the skin starts to have to do with it, because I think it's more of a class issue. Personally, like Gandhi, he revolted against the white British imperialists, but he was revolting against the conquest and the capitalizing of his country. Didn't matter what color the skins were. Now, hopefully, I think we can take that moving forward. I wish I had something more profound to say after that awesome
you go
evocation
back,
of Gandhi.
Listen, when you go back far enough and nations and cultures were divided by race, like countries were literally a group of people who were one race, it's easy to see how racism emerged, because they were like, I know who's in my country and who will protect me, and that person looks different. But we're now in an era of you can fly across the planet in a matter of hours. We live in a country that's the great American melting pot. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was correct. His point was correct. The civil rights movement was correct. In order for us to now function in this amazing new reality, we have to treat people. We have to treat them based on the content of their character and the color of their skin,
or their political affiliation.
Well, I disagree. I think
why
Nazis.
Yeah, but not all Nazis were evil.
Oh, come on.
No,
dude.
just because they identified with that party didn't make them evil. Some of them like hated the violence.
If you are a cog in that machine that is, advocating for genocide, I'm sorry, I'm going to discriminate against you for your politics.
That, you got to say the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of those people aren't evil, or
yes,
they're just stuck in that system.
No. You join the Chinese Communist Party. You know what they do.
At threat of gun.
No, you don't.
The Chinese citizens.
Regular citizens don't have to join and become party members.
Well,
the Chinese Communist Party is something they choose to be a part of. Listen, I think most politics I can respect within certain boundaries, but there are political factions I don't care for, and I'm not going to defend.
Yeah, true. Good point. I'm talking about the conservative liberal thing that Ian was referring to earlier, that liberals and maybe conservatives too need to get over I don't think we have any hope of toppling this woke invasion unless we can link arms with each other.
Yeah, I'll double down. I think that maybe the ideology of the Nazi Party is dangerous, but the individuals aren't necessarily
No, this
just
is the
because
problem.
they affiliate with something.
The problem is conservatives are not Nazis. And the woke left and the establishment machine claimed they were, and then they used a very natural predisposition for regular people who hate racism, bigotry, and genocide. You go to a regular person and say, would you link arms with a Nazi? And they're going to say, no way.
Right, because they're
and
afraid
I
of the...
completely agree.
Well, they're afraid of the word Nazi.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a literal uniform-wearing Nazi.
They don't exist, dude.
Okay, Ian. My point is, there are neo-Nazis with tattoos and swastikas on their chests. I will never join with them in any capacity politically.
But you said it. You were up in Berkeley and you met an Antifa guy. And he was
I
cool.
interviewed a guy about certain
Yeah,
things.
some guy that was Antifa, but he actually was cool.
So is that Antifa guy advocating for wiping out of people based on their race?
Not that guy. But I mean, a lot of those people are dangerous, but not everyone that identifies with Antifa is dangerous.
I don't think you understand, and there's no point going in circles. So, moving on.
Yeah, we'll have to do a show on this.
The point I'm making is that there are political factions I will never.
I think you're taking it too far. That's too extreme.
Okay, you go link arms with the Nazis. Congratulations,
well, I mean,
bro.
People can be. Look at what's his name.
Never going to
Daryl
happen.
Davis. People can be retrofitted, dude.
There are communists.
You got people out of the Klan.
There are hard communists and there are neo-Nazis that I'm not going
what
to
about
join.
Ku Klux Klan?
Daryl
Davis should have not done what he did. He got people to throw their robes away.
Are you saying he joined them in their?
Well,
no. He met with them and talked with them, like I did with the alt-right in Portland.
Yeah, I'm not saying go join the Klan. I'm saying
we
you
are
can
talking
communicate
about
with the
coalitions.
individuals.
Ian, you're not understanding the conversation. Okay, Jody is talking about linking arms with certain groups to resist wokeness. The Nazis were white identitarians. Why would I join identitarians to fight identitarians? It's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of the similar thing, right? Or let's call it authoritarianism.
Well, there's a difference, though, right? So,
well, I'm sure there is that I don't know, but
look, there could be libertarian identitarians, and I'm not a fan of their ideology, and I think it's wrong. Granted, I'll give them more respect in not beating and caging and killing people for sure. The authoritarians are the ones who do that, but identitarianism, in my opinion, is a problem, and I'm not gonna.
I agree. I agree. It's a problem. I guess to me, when I think this wokeness is a form of authoritarianism. It's clearly to
absolutely.
me, and that things like, and you could argue the same for the Nazis, neo-Nazis, right? That's authoritarianism as well. Like that's anything that's identitarianism, right? Is like.
Well, you can be woke and be libertarian, in that you would calmly and peacefully advocate for your beliefs and say these things without forcing people, without insulting them, without coercing them or beating them. When you see Antifa, who are identitarian, because Antifa is a nebulous term, when you see leftist identitarian groups going around beating people, and many Antifa are, but the flag is a nebulous reference to like communism, then these. You can have someone. Actually, let me say this because I've said it before. I met a communist guy in Berkeley, and he told me Antifa was wrong for beating and attacking people, and that true communism would never support that. And I was like, all right, well, there you go. We can break bread and have a conversation. I think his ideology is bad.
I was referencing, yeah.
I think your ideology is bad, but if you're not authoritarian, then we're all right. The problem is communism itself is arguably authoritarian because the libertarian spectrum of the left doesn't scale up into large numbers. Anybody who truly wants a communist society will never implement it without force. It doesn't work. It doesn't scale. So libertarian versus authoritarian, I think, is a different argument, but a deserving one. Authoritarianism is bad. That's the problem. It centralizes power. It corrupts systems, and it causes them to break down, which is why all of these communist countries fail. However, the Chinese Communist Party learned from the failures of these other countries, implemented capitalist policies and institutions to protect their party control and authoritarianism in their country. And they're a weird kind of pseudo-communism, I guess. It's an authoritarian regime. It doesn't matter what you call it, fascist, communist, whatever. It's one party rule, and they oppress their people to get what they want.
Yeah, and that's why I think the left-right distinction is meaningless when authoritarianism comes to town. Left-right's kind of a luxury. of a functioning democracy, or however imperfect.
I think it's divide and conquer.
Yeah, the communists used it. Mao used it. They talked about rightists a bunch.
When you see
Really?
Yeah.
Mao?
when you see conservatives, and right now there's a big gun control thing going on Twitter. There was Kyle Kalinske tweeted a poll about gun control. He was like, gun control, should we have strict regulation, light regulation, no regulation, ban guns? Most of his followers said strict regulation, but a ton of his followers who are leftists said, quote, under no pretext. That is the leftist version of shall not be infringed. So many people on the right will reference the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And they'll quote that and they'll respond to people when talking about gun control. For the leftists, it's Karl Marx who said, under no pretext should ammunition and arms be surrendered. The working class should frustrate any attempt, even by force if necessary. So the leftists reference Marx saying, don't give up your guns. And the right references the Constitution saying, we can keep our guns. And it's interesting then, when these two factions could probably agree and have something meaningful linking arms and going against the establishment, the corporatists, the authoritarians. So I look at, I got into a mini argument with Cameron Kasky, who is one of the Parkland kids, and he's very pro-gun control. But I think the general assessment is he's not really pro-gun control, he's just trolling on Twitter. So I'm like, okay, maybe I walked into that and he was trolling me. But his position is authoritarian right, the seizure of weapons, because even the authoritarian left, commies are like pro-gun. There's only one faction, it's like authoritarian centrist and right-leaning that want to take people's guns away. So to see like these establishment personalities basically advocating for authoritarian right-wing positions, well, there you go. You know what the problem is, I suppose. The left and the right, actual, populists, and even the Antifa types who are authoritarian, all agree we should have our guns. Karl Marx said it. You even got authoritarian left saying people can keep their guns.
So how can we make that happen then?
I think people can be de-radicalized. I love this Daryl Davis. Are you familiar with his story?
No, was that the movie?
I don't think they made a movie out of him yet.
Daryl Davis is a jazz musician. He's a black man. And he went to Klan rallies and then talked to them. And through conversation and being friends, de-radicalized them.
Yeah, I knew who Daryl Davis is.
But he quite literally opposed them every step of the way and was extremely critical of their beliefs.
Yeah, you got to.
So there's a difference between linking arms with somebody and going to their face and saying, you're wrong, here's why.
Yeah, not approaching the crowd, but the individuals.
It's a really, really great story. You're going to love it. Daryl Davis, a black man sitting in a truck with a white Klan member. And the Klan member made a disparaging comment about the genetics of black people. Daryl Davis told him he was wrong. He was like, that's not true. He's like, I'm not the way you describe, black people. And he said the Klan member told him, oh, it's because your genes are recessive. So then Daryl looks at the Klan member and says, did you know that there's a gene in white people to make them predisposed to be serial killers? And the Klan member was like, what? That's not true. And Daryl said, name a black serial killer. And then the Klan guy was like, wait a minute. And then he was like, but I'm not a serial killer. And then Daryl responded, oh, it's recessive in you. And it was a really great smackdown of this guy who didn't quite understand what he was talking about. And then that guy, that's one of Daryl Davis's stories. Through conversations, telling these guys you were wrong. One of the most amazing stories he had was that he met this Klan member who was a big rock and roll fan. And there was this famous car, I guess. I don't know a lot about the cars. And Daryl, being a well-known musician, was like, oh yeah, I can get you to go and check out that car. I can get you into that, museum, whatever, to see it and like sit in it or whatever. And this Klan guy all of a sudden was like, no way. Daryl brings him to this, I guess it was a museum or whatever, and he gets to see this legendary vehicle from a rock and roll legend. And this Klan guy just had this profound moment where he was like, I can't believe it. Everything they were telling us was not true. Daryl Davis just did this, like made his life like it was a dream come true. And it was a black guy who did it. The racist narratives are lies. And so I question anybody who's trying to divide us and make us fight each other. And I really do think a large component is powerful special interests, elites, billionaires, the billionaires and the millionaires who have an interest in making us fight each other instead of them. When they're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars like Tom Steyer into our elections to subvert our rights. And he did. Steyer was flooding the zone with all this money to strip away our right to bear arms. And leftists and conservatives agree we have a right to do that. That's the problem. Bernie's right about that. I wish he was more vocal on the millionaires part. I guess he's bringing it back. So,
but that story you told, I mean, Daryl Davis, that was an individual. Those were individual conversations. It's not like he was up in front of a group trying to convince the whole group. The part of it is getting people out of the you called it a cult, getting them alone, I guess, and developing a relation, humanizing the other side, I guess, right?
If it's a non-theistic religion. So when I was talking to James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose a few years ago when they did the Sokol Squared thing, and the way Peter Boghossian described it was it's a religion, and when people said there's no deity, and he says Buddhism doesn't have a deity either. So it's a non-theistic religion. They follow, it's very similar. They have, they shun the disbelievers. There's some form of confession, I guess, that doesn't seem to work.
Original sin.
Yeah, there's original sin, privilege.
I got a feeling it's like a dam built up with like this energy flow that's blockaded by this like racist ideology. And if you chip away at it piece by piece, like person by person, and have the conversations, eventually it cracks and bursts open, and there will be a flood of like this energy that we're trying to free.
Yeah, it's like a house of cards. Like it just pull out a few. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
You know what the problem is? We're the good guys. We're playing by the rules. We're trying to be honest. We're trying to recognize our own faults. And our goodwill is being exploited by con artists, deceivers, manipulators, and zealots. They can cheat because they don't care. To them, the ends justify the means. To us, we're trying to create a better world. So they can exploit that goodwill. They can exploit free speech. For instance, I, have defended the free speech of the left and the right. And I love it when they post, we're all the conservatives defending the free speech of, the BDS movement. And I'm like, I'm right here. I'm the free speech individual, not the conservative or anything. But they don't return the same favor. When a good example, when a journalist at the New York Times was being heavily criticized by all these outlets, the media calls it a harassment campaign. When the same media then targets a harassment campaign against conservative individuals, they all laugh and gloat. So I can sit here and be like, stop name dropping people to drive, a flood of emails their way. It's a waste of time. Criticize the institutions. It's meaningless to them. They don't care. They're not going to praise me. They're not going to respect me for doing that. But I do it because it's the right thing to do. They won't return that, which means we are at a very serious disadvantage.
Yeah, it's an information war.
Always consider.
I like internet video because you can reach individuals in mass.
Yeah, the internet video. Yeah, the video I made did very well in terms of views. Like a lot of people saw it and resonated with it, and I'm very happy that I hear from people now who are saying, that helped me. And I don't think everyone can just wake up and make a video, but I always tell people, you can. Part of what Helen Pluckrose is doing right with Counterweight support. This is an organization in the UK that helps people affected by woke ideology in their workplace or their school. Is that she has a community there where people can talk to other people and essentially deprogram. Because when you're in an environment where you're sitting at a table and somebody says rich white women, and nobody says anything, you kind of think maybe I'm crazy. Maybe like you start to doubt what's reality, what's real. And you start to think, am I racist? Like, because I think that's unprofessional so I think it's really important to find at least one other person you can talk to get a reality check. And that's Counterweight does that really well. And I think we need more ways to find each other. So when people do speak out, they become like lightning rods, like emails pour in. Jonathan Kay, the Quillette journalist, was talking about this, about how whenever he publishes an article about higher education, all these faculty and students write to him and say, hey, here's my story and I'm afraid. And so it's like they need a way to find each other. Like instead of just going to the one person who spoke out. We don't have any infrastructure to support. I mean, our entire infrastructure has been captured. We don't have any infrastructure to support these people. And that's a major problem.
It's starting to get built.
It's starting to get built. Yeah.
Decentralized too, so that central servers can't shut you down. Because that stuff, if it threatens the narrative, they'll try and pull the plug.
Yeah, I heard about that. There's somebody working on.
There's a lot of cool
software,
stuff. We're working on
right?
RSS3. There's PocketNet is doing stuff.
They sponsor the show periodically.
Very cool decentralized apps. Mines has something called Nomad that's kind of a project that Mines is working on. There's a lot. I mean, the decentralized movement is huge right now.
That's
you got to
be
look
very
up,
helpful.
Yeah. ISPs are still centralized, which is a problem. So we'll have to eventually build a decentralized ISP, internet service provider.
I think the infrastructure gets built when we get people to just stand up for themselves and start building it. And so long as there are people who are cowering in fear, understanding what's happening, but not wanting to stick their necks out, then, you know, there you go.
Another good one's Odyssey. There's like a decentralized data flow service. They specialize in video right now.
It's almost like it's like the Matrix in a lot of ways.
Yeah, how can we get more people to stand out? I know Aaron Kinsvater. I'm friends with him. I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry, Aaron. Yeah, the professor of faculty at University of Vermont. He made a video recently talking about it, calling it a secular religion.
Yeah.
And I'm just...
Now they're demanding his resignation.
Yeah, there was a change.org petition going around, but then somebody, Karlin Borisenko, started another one calling for him to be, to have the job of the diversity, inclusion, equity czar or whatever.
I mean, the diversity, inclusivity, and equity position is itself like a chaplain. It's like these institutions are appointing religious affirmation officials to these organizations.
I'm guessing they probably very well paid.
Oh, yeah. It's the religion is infecting these institutions, and they're creating jobs for them, and people don't resist. They're just allowing the religion to sweep over.
The best way I can find to help to bring light to these people is to play the long game, like the Chinese Communist Party or other intelligent long-term, but like you got to make videos every day. I would do 2-3 videos a day. You start to build this following of people that are really listening to you, and then you have the opportunity to bring other people in, like what Tim's doing with this show. And you can
start talking on air, like on the video.
Yeah, with other, and you find people like you that are experiencing it firsthand, and you shine the light on it, and then it just grows so fast.
Like people like boots on the ground, like other, like giving them a platform and making them feel supported.
Yes.
Not just that, but one of the things we're working on outside of this show is we're planning the vlog, which is going to be a vlog of the house and crazy shenanigans, and we got chickens and they're small.
Skateboarding.
And now rollerblading as well for the aggressive inline people who have been asking us about wanting to come. Absolutely, you're all invited. And BMX too. I want to make this a fun place for everybody to come and periodically enjoy various things, music, comedy, whatever it is for building culture. We're gonna do that kind of stuff so that people can have an opportunity to build culture and show people the other side of that fire. We're having a good time. You guys go get locked down in your cubicle apartments in New York City and drop to your knees and pray to your woke, diversity, inclusivity, and equity officer. And we're going to be rocking out some, old school rock and roll and writing new music and baking bread.
To the garage.
Chickens are going to be everywhere, clucking and jumping, and there's cats doing cat stuff. And we're going to be doing tray flips and tail whips and macchio grinds or whatever, and just having a good time. So
I must say, I have met, I forgot what it was like to be able to talk with people openly. And
that's right.
And like, I've made so many friends since I came out. I lost a lot of friends.
You can watch George Carlin again.
I can do whatever I want.
How's your state of mind shifted? You mentioned earlier.
That is a good question. When I made that first video, it was just such a relief. And I think about my uncle. Sorry, I just went away from the mic. My uncle, it's a sad story. He was gay. He's dead now, but he was gay, and he had a family. He was married and had children, and he didn't actually come out until he was like in his 60s, and he was so much happier to me, and it kind of feels maybe like that. Like it just felt like I cannot.
You are gonna get.
I cannot overemphasize
for that.
Yeah, probably.
They're gonna be like, "How dare you compare being anti-woke to?" But I hear what you're saying.
Maybe I could say it because
that's stressful.
No, I think I agree with you.
Yeah,
like
I mean, the
secret,
the telling yourself that the internal policing causes great psychic damage, and I not doing that anymore. And somebody said something about totalitarianism, that it's not a top-down movement, that it's a bottoms-up, that people start internally policing themselves first, and then somebody just steps in.
Oh,
that's how it happens. And that's what I was doing. I was internally policing myself, and it's very damaging. I mean, a lot of people in the Cultural Revolution, we had a lot of suicides, and in Soviet Russia too, like a lot of people committed suicide. They went crazy. This stuff, like, even in their own family, they're like
people
worried.
have to stand up now before it's too late, and hopefully speaking up is the first thing. Hopefully we're not too late. There's some news
Yeah.
stories that make me optimistic. Sometimes I'm pessimistic, but when you look at them eating themselves, they're looking for things to cancel, start canceling each other. I think I'm fairly optimistic. But how about we jump over to these super chats?
Yes.
What do you guys say?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
time.
If you haven't already, smash the like button because it really does help. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share the show if you really like it. Leave us a good review on iTunes and Spotify if you have not done that already. It really does help. And did I say smash the like button?
Yes.
Definitely. All right, we got this from Matthew Hammond. He says, why is it taking so long to hire people for the Timcast site? Carl at the Lotus Eaters is hiring people in a complete lockdown in the UK. It's not taking a long time. We've hired, I think, 3 people in the past month and a half.
Just because you haven't.
Yeah,
seen
you just
them.
can't see them, I guess.
Yeah.
Stay behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's like a dozen employees now. This company.
Yeah,
We're
pretty
growing
much.
like crazy.
Wow.
We got a lot coming. A lot more people. We are narrowing down our search for a paranormal podcast producer, so a new show. We have some,
Paranormal?
oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, we talk about DMT and God and all that stuff way too much, but we're going to be talking about ghost stories and theories, and I really want to get academics, and I want to have like researchers in the paranormal, legitimate academic university researchers who are not the kooky TV show types. So we're doing all that stuff, and it's actually happening. The new site might be up even by the end of this week, and then with the new site, we're going to bring on writers, and there's going to start being articles on, moderate liberal cultural commentary from other people. So it's going to be like there's so many conservative sites like the Daily Wire, the Daily Caller, the Blaze. Where's like the anti-woke, anti-establishment liberal version for like regular moderate individuals? Well, hopefully I think we'll actually put that together, and we'll see how it rolls. Christina H says, Tim has inspired me to get chickens. We did, in fact, get chickens.
I love the chickens. I hung
They're-
out today for the first
They're
time.
the best.
So we have the Chicken City, but right now they're confined to one building in the Chicken City because they're still very small.
Yeah.
And we're just getting them used to it. So I'm going to go check on them afterwards, make sure they're okay. We've got some motion sensor lights to scare away predators. We've got the fence double layered. Might not be enough.
Still gonna be nervous.
Yeah, we're still worried
Really?
about. Yeah,
You're-
yeah. Coyotes, raccoons.
We were feeding them bugs earlier.
Yes.
It's
feeding them
hardcore.
stink bugs.
And they're like,
They're great.
they're
They're
omnivorous,
savage.
but
Well,
man,
they're
they will rip bugs apart.
Stink
Dinosaur.
bugs are
Chase each
everywhere.
other.
Yeah.
Stink bugs are all over the place. They're invasive, they're massive, and they're everywhere, and they're really dumb and slow. But apparently the chickens just
Good for
they
chicken.
they see it, and they can see the bug before I can. It's amazing, and they just zoom at it, and then they all fight over it.
Yep.
It's really,
I wonder if
they
we
love it.
made like tracks if they would go on a chicken race with
I
the
bet
one
they
in the
would.
lead with the bug in his
Yeah.
mouth,
A maze.
like running
Yeah.
circles around.
That'd be so fun. I already have a favorite. They're so cute.
Oh, here we go. Zachary Bird says ban Dodge Ram 2500s, vehicle of choice for DUIs.
Oh.
4.95% source in certify.com. Moms demand high capacity DUI vehicles control now. All white men own large trucks. I actually have a Ram 2500.
It's
is it?
banned.
Oh, it's nice.
We got it because we're going to be going on tour. And the plan is at some point to take an RV. So we do this show on the road in a variety of cities. We stay in one city for a week. Then Friday night, we do a live show at a venue. We do the podcast in an actual venue with the audience. And they can, yell things or whatever. And then we can yell back and stuff
Oh,
like that.
that sounds
So
awesome.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're thinking right now the plan is for the first trip's going to be Nashville for 1 week. Then we travel over the weekend to Austin, then back to Nashville, and then back home because we're on the East Coast. And then from then on, we'll try like Florida, and we'll slowly branch out. And
So fun.
we stay a week in that city so we can get a variety of guests from the area. So Nashville works out really well. There's tons of Daily Wires there, I guess. But then there's a lot of people in Nashville, so that'll be really fun. All right, let's see. Erica Baum says, high five, Tim, for doing real conversation. I know you have your own opinions here, but this is some of the truest journalism type stuff we have. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, you got to say everything you wanted to say so far and telling your story and everything like that, and people can understand what's happening. Chris DeBon says, Tim, you are wrong about seceding. West and Northeast Coast states with disproportionate control house all comped institutions and corporations, allowing CCP infection to spread. Infection is too bad. We must amputate. I mentioned this in my main segment today about Biden issuing sanctions on China. I'm happy that he's doing something. Hopefully it's enough. I don't know if it will be. But I think if the U.S. breaks apart, China wins. And they're authoritarians, and they got concentration camps, and that's going to be a nightmare for the rest of the world. So I'm not a fan of that. I got criticism for Biden, but if he does something that's good, I'm not going to rag on him for it. I'm going to give him credit where credit is due. Memo Type says, sup Tim, Ian, Lydia. Heart the show. Just joined on the members page and love the UFO talk with Chrissy. If you're into that stuff, look at Missing 411. Researched by former detective David Paulides. Ongoing thing with people going missing. Very mysterious. Ooh, I will check that out. That's very fun.
Thank you.
Cousin William says a rap is no more than a chant and has been going on in every culture forever and a day.
Yeah,
Well,
drums.
not anymore.
Amen.
Now it's racist.
It's like vocal drum beats with language.
Oh, yeah. William Martin says, hey, Tim, with gun control back in full swing, have you thought about having Colleen Noir or someone like that on the show? Also, have you ever looked into John Lavelle from the Warrior Poet Society Network? I think they would both be great guests. Yeah, we'd love to have Colleen Noir on. I wonder why we haven't. Maybe we should need to reach out to him. Maybe he's not available. I don't know. We'll figure it out. He's busy.
Super
There you go.
busy.
He's super busy.
Yeah, he has like an open invitation. We're gonna make it happen.
All right, let's see. Shane Kerwood says, let's set her up, y'all. F. Smith. Wish I could give more, but still got bills to pay. Well, yes, there's a GoFundMe for what's the title of the GoFundMe?
It's help Jody Shaw with legal and living expenses. Just Google Jody Shaw and GoFundMe. You'll find it.
If you would like to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
JP253 says, started watching daily after Crowder's election stream. You, Crowder, Shapiro, and Bongino are who I listen to daily. Just joined Timcast today. You need to have JP Sears, Awaken with JP, or Colleen Noir. They're both very busy. Look, one of the biggest challenges with people who have their own shows is they have their own shows. They don't need to come on this show. I mean, it would be great for us, but, you know, they're doing their thing. And I love the idea. It's like watching me, Crowder, Shapiro, and Bongino. I'm pretty sure I have very different opinions from, like, the three of those. And I think Crowder, Shapiro, and Bongino have similar opinions. But I think that's the important thing. That's fantastic. It's funny when they try and claim I'm a conservative, and it's like they watch the show and Tim Pool rags about how, like, the weed attacks the rich or something. It's like, I'm pretty sure that's not a conservative opinion.
Would you say how the weed attacks the rich?
How we need to tax the rich.
I would love to see you on with Crowder.
Yeah, what
I've been on Crowder several times.
an all-star.
Oh,
And
really?
Ben.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's like, you know, Tim Pool, you love him or you hate him. And I'm like, well, that's fair. I think Crowder's great.
Yeah, it's great.
I think he's made some really offensive comedy. But it's weird
Yes.
how, like, you know, Media Matters went after him because he did this segment they called Really Racist. And I'm like, what was the difference between what he did and what Family Guy does literally every single day when I watch Family Guy?
It's a
And I
cartoon,
mean
basically.
it. I mean it.
It's like a free pass.
Family Guy's jokes are 10 times more racist than anything Crowder's ever done. And they're just jokes. They're like, people poke the bear. They try to be offensive for, like, you know, whatever. But it's political, that's why. Just because Crowder does political commentary, and that's an issue for them. Stephen Decker says, what you're doing is awesome, Jody. Is there anyone working on behalf of the security guard and custodians who had their lives ruined? That crazy, word I can't say on Timcast, woman who started this should be sued to oblivion.
Yes, actually, very exciting. The Woodson Center, Bob Woodson is a civil rights era civil rights leader who marched for civil rights, for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And he just sent a letter to President Kathleen McCartney. She's the president of Smith College, signed by 44 black intellectuals and writers across the country, asking her to stop the CRT stuff, apologize publicly to these employees that have been hurt, and to make them whole. And so, and he also in the letter they also asked her to provide evidence, because she's claiming that in response to the New York Times, there was a New York Times article, she's claiming that there's a reason why we have to keep doing these racial justice initiatives, and she named all these racial disparities. And so Bob Woodson, in his letter, said, okay, what you're talking about, where's the evidence? We would like to see some evidence. So I'm waiting to see how she's going to respond to this letter, if she's going to respond to it. It feels
A Kafka trap. Those who demand evidence are just white supremacists trying to protect themselves. That's your proof.
well, that's the problem, right? It's an attack on
Yeah, also, they don't believe in evidence.
The word
No, they really
justice
don't.
is like being twisted. That's that word justice.
Yeah, he said that actually to me. He's like, this is a perversion of civil justice,
Yep.
of civil rights. That's what he said, a perversion.
Yeah. Sine Castro says, have you guys considered having Dennis Prager on? Yeah, I'd love to have Dennis Prager on,
Interesting.
but he seems like a bit of a big fish. There are a lot of people I'd love to have on the
Wow.
show as well, but like the most prominent figures in politics, hey man, they're welcome. Donald Trump, how about him too? Come on over.
It'd
be fun.
He did Lisa Booth's podcast. He emailed me about it, and I was like, wow, that's really great. Good for her. That's awesome. Hopefully it was a good interview. I'd love to interview Trump because it'd be a really weird interview. He'd probably get mad at
Fun.
me. I'd be like, I voted for you, but here are the things I'm mad about. I'd have to give him a compliment sandwich
Yeah.
where I'm like, I know the media is lying about so much. I like this stuff.